Hello and welcome to today's Advent Calendar window, and today is the 6th of December. Isn't time flying? And today we are joined by everybody's favourite elf, Sidney, who is joining us today dressed in his finest elf costume to open the next window in the Advent Calendar. Welcome, Sidney.
Hello, and welcome to this window in the TooFatLardies Advent Windows for 2025. And the question that Rich and Nick asked me for this one is, which of the mechanisms in your rules do you think works well? So playtesting a game is the essential stage in seeing whether game mechanisms meet with the ideas behind a game. Over the last few years, as many of you listening to this Advent window will know, I've been working and travelling up and down the UK, playing two games that I've been working on, which are based on sword fighting. There's one version set in the world of Alexandre Dumas, which is with flashing blades, and there's one version which is set in Edo period Japan, which is called When the Last Sword is Drawn. And at the heart of each of those games are mechanisms based on combat with swords between individual protagonists. And in those games, a group of combatants fight and suffer damage. Now, under the initial rules that we had, the miniature combatants on the tabletop suffered wounds which reduced their ability to fight, normally each wound being worth 1 dice in the combat, and reduce the force morale as those runes accumulated. It was a really simple system, and it worked. But the more I played the games, and the more I talked to the people who played the games as well, and the more I thought about it and read books and listened to various other podcasts, the more I thought I was missing a trick. And that was really because the wounds which were inflicted on the combatants really served to degrade their performance. And we were left with a situation that combatants, once they started to have their performance downgraded, they were less effective. So one side felt that they were really starting to lose the battle, an inevitable slope towards defeat, perhaps. But the other trick I think I was missing related to the ideas behind the game. And one of the ideas was really to try and create a very cinematic visual spectacle on the tabletop, which had a lot to do with how we think of sword fighting and a lot to do with art, literature, films, and the drama of two people fighting each other in a duel to the death. I wanted players to become immersed in the storytelling just as much as rolling the dice. Well, I've mentioned it before on the Oddcast and in the Advent windows that my feeling is with many miniature games, the dice and the figures can't do that for themselves. To complement the base of the mechanical rules that I had, I wanted to add another rule which was based on the theme or the cinematic aspect of dueling, something which allowed a greater chance of drama, a greater chance of a violent, sudden death of one of the combatants, not just a wound after wound slither and slope towards an inevitable defeat. So one of the ways I did this was by trying to create a vector between normal dice and a special dice, with the idea that a special dice adds something to the combat but doesn't negate the original dice roll. One of the things that I looked at was role-playing games, and one of the games I looked at had the idea of inflicting on an opponent a debilitating cut. So I created a single dice with one face out of 6 marked with a spatter of blood. The blood dice, if you like, and as it's become called. And that's rolled at the same time as the other dice are rolled in any combat, whether it's a fight or a duel. And the idea is that if the blood dice comes up with the blood spatter face up, that inflicts a cut on the opponent. It's not a wound. It's most definitely a cut. And in that regard, it's cinematic. You only have to watch Kill Bill Volume 1 to know how dramatic it can be for Uma Thurman to receive various cuts in the final combat sequence in that film. But they don't slow Uma down. She's just as deadly, just as effective as she was at the start of the film. And that was the essence that I wanted to try and record. Cuts being inflicted on one of the combatants which don't affect their combatability, but when a further wound is inflicted, all of the debilitating cuts which have been suffered by the combatant make that further wound much more deadly. So while the combat is continuing, one of the combatants can rack up debilitating cut after debilitating cut, but if then a wound happens, it's likely to be so more severe and more deadly. And that, combined with a change to the combat chart to allow particularly grave wounds to be catastrophic and dramatic. And that served not just the purpose for seeing brave combatants struggling through numerous debilitating cuts to still fight effectively, but also to culminate in a really dramatic end for that combatant if they are wounded a final time. And in playing the game, people just love that. It allows both sides to fight effectively, even if suffering some wounds and then a couple more debilitating cuts. But it also increases the tension that the next wound that one of the combatants suffered may be doubly dramatic and doubly worse. It preserves the ability for an ostensibly losing side to really turn the table and struggle against the odds, notwithstanding the fact that they've been hit a few times. So it's a credible mechanism to reinforce the other themes within the game. And that's why I felt that that simple mechanism, just of using different dice for different things, but interrelated and vectored together, worked well to reinforce the themes of the game.